Welcome to the Positive Spiritual Living Podcast, brought to you by Unity on the Bay. This is your positive path for spiritual living.
There was an elderly woman who was experiencing loneliness, and so she decided one morning to stop by the pet store in her neighborhood to find a companion. And oddly enough, she found a talking parrot, but she thought that would be really nice and not too high on the maintenance side of things. So she purchased the parrot and took it home, only to discover, much to her dismay, that the parrot had a bad habit. And the parrot's bad habit was that the parrot liked to shout obscenities and profanities and call the elderly woman names. As she was doing this, perched on the woman's arm, she would peck at her skin ever so lightly, and it was a complete annoyance. Nonetheless, the woman was determined to befriend the parrot, so she decided to attempt to re-educate it with a more polite vocabulary. One day, as she was preparing her breakfast, she had the parrot on her arm in the kitchen, and once again, the parrot launched into a round of obscenities and profanities and started pecking, this time hard enough to prompt a reaction from the older woman, who reached over to her refrigerator freezer door, pulled it open, and just shook the parrot off of her hand into the freezer, slammed the door shut, and the parrot was just carrying on in that frozen wasteland of the freezer, on and on, until all of a sudden it became completely silent. The woman paused for a moment and thought, I hope I didn't hurt the bird. So she ran back over to the freezer, opened it up, took out the very cold bird, put it on her arm, and the bird said, "My dear lady, I wish to apologize for all of the profanity and expletives that I have shouted at you, all the pecking that I did at your arm, and I beg for your forgiveness." And the elderly woman said, "No problem, of course I forgive you," and went about fixing her breakfast with the parrot on her arm. All of a sudden, the parrot looked at her and said, "Ma'am, may I ask you a question?" "Well, of course you can," said the lady. The parrot turned and looked at the freezer door and then back to the lady and said, "Just exactly what did the chicken do?" This morning I am talking on the subject of true forgiveness, and I wanted to share some, yes, it's a moaner and a groaner, and it takes a moment, I realize, so whenever it strikes you, go for it, you know. Oscar Wilde said this: "Always forgive your enemies. Nothing annoys them so much." Marlene Dietrich said, "Once a woman has forgiven her man, she must not reheat his sins for breakfast." And finally, somebody by the name of Anonymous said, "Sometimes the first step to forgiveness is understanding that the other person is a complete idiot." This morning, what I want to talk to you about is the single greatest activity or action you can ever engage in if you really want to be free. If you really want to wake up every morning knowing who you are as a child of God and live in that awareness throughout the day. And it is the act, simple in nature but complex in execution, of taking responsibility for your experience. It always amazes me, and I don't share this with a sense of judgment, I share it with a sense of understanding. But how many people will come into my office and ask me for assistance or help or spiritual support of some kind? And I'll get as far as, "Well, you know, what you really need to do is take responsibility for your experience." Most people would rather do anything, my friends, than take responsibility for their experience. They want to put the responsibility on everybody and everything outside of them. And my friends, that is a ticket to continued perpetual victimization. If you want to continue living your life in a victim mentality, just keep looking out here for the cause of all of your dilemmas and challenges and problems. Because I guarantee you, as long as you're looking out here, you will be a victim to everybody and everything that comes across your path with any kind of, and hear me on this, condemnatory judgment. I used to just say that judgment was a good thing to avoid, and Jesus, told us we shouldn't judge. But then people would come back to me and say, well, how can I possibly get through my life without judgment? And I understand that. There are decisions that we have to make. There are shots that we have to call. So specifically this morning, what I want to talk about is condemnatory judgment. That's not a judgment where you're just saying, well, I think I prefer this over this. This is a judgment that comes with it a shot of condemnation. Are you with me? So, and you have to look carefully because sometimes this condemnation is very subtle on your part. Oh, I'm a good spiritual person. I don't condemn anybody. So you have to really look closely for any trace of condemnation, any sense of superiority that you may be exercising over another person because you think in some way you are better than they are or different than they are. My friends, I'll tell you this, and if I'm honest with myself, I'm talking to myself. We all have this little incessant inner voice that offers a condemnatory commentary about nearly everything. If you really listen for it, it's in there. Well, why in the world would she do that? Or why in the world did he say that? Or act in this manner? Or can't they see? So there is a little hint of condemnation in those judgments at times. And this morning what I'm talking about is, and I'm again speaking to myself, my friends, we must listen to that internal dialogue to be aware of the manner in which it may be shaping or forming our reactions to what occurs to us in life. And even though you may have been studying spiritual teachings for years and years, at least for myself, I find every now and then, on certain occasions more than others, the voice has its day and has its moment. No problem if I am aware. Then I can say to myself, I'm in a state of condemnatory judgment, and I have a choice. I can continue that condemnation, or I can step into a posture of love, understanding, and unconditional acceptance. The choice is always mine. Now, Jesus told us in the book of John, 8th chapter, 7th verse, these simple words that are a foundation to his ministry. So hear them carefully. Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone. That means that when you are in a state of condemnatory judgment and you reach in your pocket and grab that stone and you are ready to hurl it at your supposed enemy out here, you pause for a moment and ask yourself, am I free from sin? Now, let me give you a brief exercise in metaphysics at this point. Metaphysically, we understand sin to be, in a word, misperception. Ultimately, it has no reality. We do not believe that we are born sinners. We believe that sin or misperception is a part of our conditioning in the human experience. And it teaches us that we are unworthy. It teaches us that others are unworthy. It teaches us that we are victims. All of this is erroneous. None of it is true. But if you put your belief in it, it will become your experience of day-to-day reality. So what Jesus is telling us here is that before we throw our condemnation onto anybody or anything out here, we must first go within to ask for clarity in terms of our own misperceptions. And I will tell you this, if you are perceiving anything but the presence of the Christ and the divine in another person or in a circumstance or situation in your life, you are misperceiving. And this is stemming from the number one unity principle, which is that in ultimate reality, there is only one presence, there is only one power. It is God, it is good. And it is everywhere present, everywhere in existence. If we are not seeing that, I guarantee you it is because we have accepted a misperception and we have placed our belief, our faith, and our confidence in that misperception. Thus, that is what we see. So Jesus is telling us you got to go into your own household. You got to go into your own consciousness and clean it up before you go hurling rocks at other people. And what you're going to realize is you have no business throwing a rock at somebody else. Your business is to clean up your own internal consciousness, to clear yourself of misperceptions so that you can see clearly the one presence and the one power of God that is everywhere in your experience. I love the way that the universe has an individually appointed curriculum for the spiritual awakening of every one of us. Now, we're not always aware of it, but always and ever, that divine curriculum is seeking to share information, insights, perspectives, revelations through even the simplest of encounters in our day-to-day existence. You cannot look to anybody or anything outside of you to direct your spiritual course in life. You must look within yourself to the indwelling presence of the divine to guide your steps. And what you do as you enter into this experience is that you start finding things showing up in your life. And you say, well, isn't this interesting? And then you go a little beyond that and go, it's beyond interesting, it's miraculous. And such was the case in my own life a few months ago when I received a communication from a gentleman who told me he had authored a book. And the name of the book was People's Anonymous. And he himself remains anonymous as the author, although I will tell you a secret. He is with us this morning. He is in the foyer, and he does have copies of these books. They're also available at the Source Bookstore. But what he told me was that in this book, he had received his own revelation that combined the principles of the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous with the teachings found in the pages of, one of my favorite spiritual texts, A Course in Miracles. And both of these ways of being are very similar if you look beyond the specifics and even beyond the vocabulary. Much like unity, I always say the unity teaching was born out of a universal stream of consciousness that revealed itself to Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, our co-founders, so many years ago now. In this book, he has done a wonderful job of helping us realize how the 12 steps can support us in overcoming all of our addictions. Now, here's the truth, my friends. Some of us have addictions that are more blatantly obvious than others. Some of us cannot hide our addictions. Some of our addictions are well known because they're discussed openly among many different individuals in many forms. But we are all addicted to something right now. And the best thing we can do is get in touch with what those addictions are that seem to be placing us in a state of victimization oftentimes, and begin to liberate or free ourselves from them. I want to share with you these words from the book People's Anonymous. Listen carefully because this is gold. Merely beginning to look at oneself as the prime suspect in any disturbance going on around us is a tremendous advancement in the consciousness of the human race. Making a searching and fearless inventory of ourselves instead of everyone else is a major shift in the thinking of the world. It's been said that if you look at all the challenging circumstances of your life, you'll find that they all have one character in common. Who might that be? It's you. You're the common suspect in all of these ordeals. And what this statement is telling us is that while our human condition would have us want to do an endless searching inventory of all of the adversaries out here in our life, and aren't we good at that? Oh, we can list pages and pages of what's wrong with other people, right? And how they ought to change and how they ought to behave. What this is telling us is redirect that attention to within. Look at yourself. The inventory is yours to do. The internal house cleaning is yours to do, and no one else's. Charles Fillmore, as I said, the co-founder of the Unity Movement, talked about forgiveness in a slightly different way than we're typically accustomed to. Most of us think that forgiveness is a very benevolent, if not like Christian thing to do, right? Well, I was wronged, this person is a bad person, but because I'm so righteous and spiritual, I'm going to benevolently forgive them, and aren't they lucky? Now, I'm just talking openly and honestly here, but truly, forgiveness is something we do on a good day if we feel like it, for the benefit of the other person. Charles Fillmore says, forgiveness is a process of giving up the false for the true, erasing sin and error from the mind and body. Forgiveness means the giving up of something. Forgiveness removes errors from the mind. Forgiveness, my friends, doesn't have anything to do with anybody or anything outside of you. Forgiveness has to do with your recognition that you have misperceived something, and you are willing to go into your own consciousness, identify the belief, the thought, whatever it is that's creating the adverse reaction in you, and let it go, which is the title of this morning's talk. Let it go. Not for the benefit of another person. If you are holding even the tiniest grudge toward another person this morning, you got to do a searching inventory, even the tiniest little grudge. Realize that grudge is the result of your internal dynamics and has nothing to do with anybody or anything outside of you. And then do your house cleaning. Take a moment and say, I'm willing to release this idea. I'm willing to release this judgment that I have placed on another person, and instead take responsibility for my experience. Misperception happens all the time, and as I said just a moment ago, if you're seeing, if you're feeling, if you're experiencing anything that is less than the divine ultimate reality that is yours by birthright, you have some house cleaning to do. Doesn't mean that you take that finger of blame away from the people out here and put it on yourself. No, you approach yourself with compassion, with understanding, and also with a very strong, almost unquenchable thirst to be the purest and most beautiful being of light that the planet can contain. Now you're ready to make a contribution toward a better world in a very positive way. This makes forgiveness the most divine act of selfishness you can ever engage in. You're forgiving because you don't want to carry that grudge. You're forgiving because you don't want to carry that hostility. You're forgiving because you don't want to be an agent of pouring more hatred on a world that has plenty of it already. You want to be an ambassador of love, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is to identify what is inside of you that is not love or loving. I love this Nelson Mandela quote. He said that resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Take another swig, take another swig. Haven't done it yet, they're still there. Take another swig. You keep drinking poison thinking that's going to impact anybody but yourself. Your lack of forgiveness is like an internal...
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Positive Spiritual Living Podcast, brought to you by Unity on the Bay, a spiritual community located in Miami, Florida. Unity on the Bay is supported by the generosity of its community. If you'd like to make a donation or learn more about Unity on the Bay, please visit unityonthebay.org. You can also follow Unity on the Bay on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for even more positive spiritual inspiration. Until next time, thanks for listening and many blessings. Namaste.